Hello and welcome back to Highway Farty, and welcome to my home. My name is Don, and it is good to have you here. And today I am going to deliver for you. Deliver on a promise I made seems oh so long ago. To take you to the site of the notorious brothel that Babe Ruth considered his favorite in the whole country. It was right here in St. Louis. Indeed, it was a place where Babe Ruth would essentially live when he was in town. And I have finally found where it was located. We will be going there in a few minutes. I can smell that Bordello coffee brewing from here, and it is intoxicating. I didn't expect this to turn into such a project, by the way. I didn't want this thing to be a Herman Wouk Winds of War miniseries. But history had other ideas. It took me down twists and turns and curvy roads until we are finally oh so close to finding where this bordello was located. The reason I am in my home to start this episode is because I want to share with you an item from my personal collection. Now, this is not like I'm the Whitney American Museum of Art or anything like that, but I collect things. It's just something I do. I collect stories, I collect books, I collect artifacts, I collect memorabilia. I'm always on Facebook Marketplace, or I'm going to thrift stores or antique malls or conventions, whatever. It's just a sickness, I guess, I have. I don't know what's going to happen to all this stuff once they put a tag on my toe, but for now I'm having fun doing it. I want to show you an item from my collection, and the reason why I'm staying home is because I didn't want to take this with me in the car anywhere because it is so old and fragile and brittle. But at the end of today's episode, I promise you, we will finally be laying Babe Ruth to rest. Let him rest in peace. Move on to other stories. This was the morning newspaper the day Babe Ruth died, the Morning St. Louis Globe-Democrat. August 17, 1948. One of the cool things about all these historic newspapers, and I seem to acquire them quite frequently, yes, it's kind of neat to see the headline for the main story of the day, but also look at the other stories that were happening on a particular day that history was made. And on this day, it was announced that the Stag Brewing Company and the Hyde Park Brewing Company would be merging. Now, that's ironic because I have an episode all planned on the Hyde Park Brewery. Stag and Hyde Park, both St. Louis breweries. So you can see why I didn't want to take this out of the house. I have a hard time handling it even in the house. Keep it in these sleeves. But I'd like to find, I'm just going to put it out there, if anyone has any ideas on this, I'd love to hear it. I'd like to find some type of longer thing where I didn't have to fold the paper when I put it in, that has holes along the side that I could put it in some kind of binder. But this will have to do for the time being. Now, I want to tie up some loose ends with Babe Ruth before we go to the bordello, or where the bordello was. Because as I said, once today is over, read my lips, no more Babe Ruth. I promise you that. No more Babe Ruth. Loose ends. I've done a lot of reading on Babe Ruth. And he's not only one of the most interesting sports historical figures, he's one of the most interesting historical figures, period. The guy is just fascinating. Seems like whenever you think you've heard every Babe Ruth story there is, and a lot of them are quite funny, another one pops up. And here's one that has a St. Louis connection to it. Babe Ruth retired from baseball in 1935. And he spends the first few years after retirement not knowing what to do with himself. He was terribly rambunctious. And he desperately wanted to manage. He thought that given his unique relationship with the New York Yankees, he thought the Yankees would offer him the opportunity to manage that team. And he was crestfallen when he learned that the owner of the Yankees, a guy called Colonel Rupert, Colonel Rupert said, "No way will you ever manage this team. You were too much of a discipline problem as a player. How in the world do you expect to manage a bunch of young guys?" And Babe Ruth hung his head, dejected. Where do you think he came calling? As always, St. Louis. He approaches the St. Louis Browns after the 1938 season, which was a particularly bad season for the St. Louis Browns. The Browns were not a good team. Now, just to remind you, St. Louis is one of the few cities in history that have had the distinction of having two baseball teams at the same time playing within the city limits. There's not very many cities that have had that. St. Louis was one of them. In the National League, of course, the Cardinals, and in the American League, the Browns. But the Browns were never particularly good. And they were always undercapitalized in terms of their financial situation. It seemed like they were always digging in the couch cushions for money. They couldn't afford star players. But Babe Ruth thought, well, hey, I might be able to do something for this team. And so he approached the owner of the Browns, a guy by the name of Bill DeWitt. And if that name sounds familiar, it should, because his son is the current owner of the St. Louis Cardinals. Babe Ruth contacts Bill DeWitt and said, "I want to manage your baseball team." He mounts an all-out campaign to get the job. And Bill DeWitt turns him down. Not because he was a discipline problem, and not because, at least from my reading, it's not because DeWitt didn't want him to manage the team. DeWitt was afraid that he was going to want too much money. So rather than explore the opportunity for some creative financing, DeWitt said no. And Babe Ruth was once again denied. He would go to his grave thinking he was a failure because he never got to manage in Major League Baseball. Isn't that amazing? A guy that set all those records thinks he was a failure because he didn't get to manage. Well, talking about Babe Ruth's last public appearance. Now this, we get into some interesting semantics, I guess you might say. What is the definition of a last public appearance in your mind? Is it a sighting? You know, you are seen in a passing car or getting out of a car going into a building. Or is it actually doing something? I raise the point for this reason. If you ask anyone what Babe Ruth's final public appearance was, including AI, it will likely tell you one of two things. It will tell you either it was June 13th, 1948 at Yankee Stadium, a very famous day where he says goodbye to the Yankee fans and the Yankees team in that dramatic photo taken from behind. Very, very moving, emotional day. But it wasn't his last public appearance. His last public appearance was on June 18th, 1948. So on June 13th, he's at Yankee Stadium. On June 18th, he's here in St. Louis. What would be his last public appearance? At Sportsman's Park. And here's the story behind that. In 1948, the Ford Motor Company, unaware of the seriousness of Babe Ruth's health condition, hired him to be their goodwill ambassador for youth baseball. Well, it gets down to the end, and he's very sick. And his people say to him, look, babe, you don't have to make this trip to St. Louis on the 18th. You don't have to do that. They will understand if you don't. You are too sick to make such a trip. He says, no. I made a promise. I promised the children of St. Louis that I would be there for them, and I am going to make good on that promise. So he boarded an airplane, and he came to St. Louis. He did a clinic with the kids, a baseball clinic. And then he made a public address at Sportsman's Park before the game. You could barely hear him speaking, even with the microphone. His throat was so ravaged by the cancer. He basically just croaks out a few words, talking about what a wonderful thing baseball is and how great it is for the development of young boys and that sort of thing. And it's a hot day. It's in June. And because of his cancer treatments, he is chilled to the bone. On that day, on such a hot day, he's wearing a camel hair coat, a full winter coat that day. He says his piece, he leaves the stadium, and that is the last time Babe Ruth ever made a public appearance, and it was right here in St. Louis. Now, I want to talk about something because I know that purists are going to come out and say, well, what about July 26th, 1948? Okay. Let's talk about July 26th, 1948. That was the premiere of the Babe Ruth story. I just lose lighting? I think I blew a fuse. Let's leave my personal life out of it for the time being and continue onward. The premiere of the Babe Ruth story was held in New York on July 26, 1948. And Babe Ruth went to the premiere of this movie that was made about his life. It starred William Bendix as Babe Ruth. If you look at the list of the worst movies ever produced by Hollywood, that one is usually on the list. But Babe Ruth went to the premiere. He got out of a car. He walked into the theater. He waved at the crowd. He did not speak. So if you want to call that a public appearance, then yes, his last public appearance was on that day because just a couple of weeks later, he dies. Now I want to talk about how I found this bordello. Remember, in the last episode, I was in Ladue. And I came across a book called Ladue Found by an author named Charlene Brie. And in the book, she talks about a notorious brothel that was located in Ladue city limits back at about the same time we're talking here, the 1920s. And the name of the madam that she gives is May Trainer. So I decided, okay, I'm going to research May Trainer. Because the information I had from the historical account from the New York Daily News reporter that was traveling with Babe Ruth during that time was that this bordello in St. Louis was run by a madam named Sally. Now we're finding out in Ladue the madam is named May. So at first glance it would seem, no, this can't be possible. You have to be talking about somebody different here. But I decided just on a hunch that I would type in the name May Trainer in a search of the St. Louis newspaper archives for that era. And two articles pop up. One of them is The Key to the Kingdom. Now, I'm not going to tell you what it says just yet. I'm going to wait till we get down to where the bordello was to read you the article because it contains an address, and so I'll give it away if I talk about it right now. But I am confident that May Trainor was, in fact, the madam, the notorious madam, the mysterious madam, who perhaps also went by the name Sally. How do I explain these name differences? One possibility is that the reporter for the New York Daily News got it wrong. It has happened that reporters get facts wrong. And it's possible that Marshall Hunt got the name wrong, calling her Sally. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that May Trainor used an alias. We know she used one alias when she lived in Ladue, when she had the Ladue brothel. She went by the name I.B. Hopkins. Quite likely that she also had the alias Sally. That's possible. The more likely scenario, I think, is that Babe Ruth got the name wrong. And here's why I say that. For all of his outgoing personality traits, and he was quite friendly to most everyone, he was terrible with names. Horrible with names. I want to go back to for the first episode that I did, where I talk about the 1926 World Series, the one that was here in St. Louis. Because there are a couple of postscripts to that I want to mention, and just sort of tying up these loose ends. This is the World Series where he made a promise to a sick child that he would hit a home run for the child. And he did. Now, as we learned in the first episode, the Yankees were in St. Louis for that game. The home run that Babe Ruth hit was dedicated to the child, was hit here in St. Louis, while the child was back east in New Jersey. Now, that child's name was Johnny Sylvester. And the media jumped all over this story. The name Johnny Sylvester was like front and center in this country. When Babe Ruth gets back to New York, the Yankees end up losing that World Series to the Cardinals in 7 games. The World Series ends in the most bizarre fashion. Babe Ruth is thrown out trying to steal second base in the bottom of the 9th inning, making it the last out of the World Series. It's a strange way for a World Series game to end, but the 1926 World Series was a strange one indeed. So the Yankees are back in New York, and Babe decides he is going to now pay a personal visit to Johnny Sylvester. And the media are flocking to this story. Because now, this is where the story that we see in the movies comes from, where Babe Ruth shows up at the child's bedside. So Babe goes to see Johnny Sylvester. And he walks in the room, and Johnny's in bed. And Babe Ruth says, hangs his head. He says, "I'm sorry I let you down, Johnny. We lost. And I made the last out of the World Series trying to steal second base. I'm sorry I let you down." And Johnny says, "Oh, go on, Babe. You didn't let me down. You didn't let me down at all, Babe. Oh, come on, Babe, cheer up. You just wait and see next year. We're going to get these guys. We're going to get them, I tell you. We're going to put it right in their ear." The point is that there was a tremendous interaction between these two. Their names were linked in the news of the day in every newspaper in the country. Fast forward to the next season, 1927. Johnny has recovered. And Johnny's uncle is so thankful at Johnny's recovery. He goes to a game at Yankee Stadium. And he sees Babe Ruth down by the railing there, talking to a reporter. Johnny's uncle makes his way down towards the field, and he gets Babe's attention. He says, "Babe, I'm Johnny Sylvester's uncle, and I just want to let you know that Johnny is doing wonderfully. He has made a full recovery, and it's all because of you. And my family and I cannot thank you enough for everything that you did for Johnny, because you were responsible for his recovery." And Babe Ruth puffs up. He says, "Oh, that makes me feel wonderful. You have no idea how great that makes me feel. Thank you so much. And be sure to give Johnny my best." And the uncle puffs up equally and says, "I will, Babe, I will." And the uncle turns around and walks back up the stairs to go to his seat. And Babe looks at the reporter he's talking to and says, "Who in the hell is Johnny Sylvester?" That's how bad he was with names. So it is not a stretch to think that he thought the madam's name was Sally. I am 100% certain that May Traynor was in fact the madam, and I am going to take you now to where this bordello was. We have to get in the car. Well, you didn't think I'd take any other way of getting here but Highway Farty, do you? And I'm not going to let a little rain keep me from this bordello. Not when I'm this close. Not when I'm this close. I am literally on the goal line. And if I have to do a tush push to get across, I'll do that. Now, before I go over, I want to put some lipstick on this pig, so there is no question whatsoever in my mind why I believe where we are about to go is in fact the bordello. So, to this newspaper article I found. Tiny little article, by the way. Thursday, September 3rd, 1925, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, page 17, buried deep in the paper. Headline: Beer found at home visited by Babe Ruth. Okay, big deal. Beer found at home visited by Babe Ruth. What this is doing is describing a Prohibition-era liquor raid, though. But reading between the lines, it becomes very apparent that this is more than just a liquor raid. I'm not going to read the whole thing. 5 cartons, 120 bottles of what the police declare to be real beer were found last night by police raiders. Ooh, that's interesting. Raiders. In the garage adjoining the house at 4021 Forest Park Avenue. Where Babe Ruth was a visitor Saturday afternoon. And it gets better. After he had been fined $5,000 and suspended from the New York Yankees at Sportsman's Park. I'll talk about that in a second. Mrs. May Traynor, who resides at the place, was arrested by the moral squad. 2 young women and a maid were also placed in custody. This was a prostitution raid. Now, there was a mention made of Babe Ruth being fined and suspended by the New York Yankees. That was the suspension heard round the world. So as the 1925 season unfolds, Babe Ruth is having a terrible year. He's not playing up to his usual standards of excellence, and his manager, Miller Huggins, has had it. He can't stand the fact that Babe Ruth refuses to abide by rules set by the team that apply to every other player, but Babe seemed to think that he could skirt them. Miller Huggins was especially angry whenever they were in St. Louis because Babe wouldn't even stay at the team hotel. He would stay at this brothel. And it all came to a boil here in St. Louis. And on that Saturday afternoon, Miller Huggins suspends Babe Ruth. As I said, this was the suspension heard round the world. If you go to the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, or you go to their website, there is a telegram in the Hall of Fame that makes reference to this entire incident here in St. Louis. From Miller Huggins to Ban Johnson, president of the American League. September 2, 1925, Wednesday. You are hereby notified that player Ruth was fined $5,000 and suspended indefinitely at St. Louis last Saturday, which would be the very day that this article is talking about. I went to the Bible of Babe Ruth. It's the first time I've mentioned this guy in this series, but Robert Creamer. He wrote what is thought to be the best sports biography of all time, and certainly the best one on Babe Ruth. Chapter 26. On Saturday afternoon, August 29th in St. Louis, Ruth was late getting to the ballpark, and most of the players were already on the field when he came sauntering into the locker room. He took off his jacket as he walked across the room, briskly hung it up in his locker. Miller Huggins was sitting on a bench smoking a pipe. He turned around on the bench. Ooh, what a dramatic power play that is. And he said, "Don't bother getting dressed, Babe. You're not playing today. I'm suspending you. And I'm fining you $5,000. You're to go back to New York on the 5 o'clock train from St. Louis. Your tickets will be waiting." $5,000, Ruth said. $5,000? F you, you little son of a bitch. Who the hell do you think you are? As he poured obscenities on the manager and ended by shouting, "If you were even half my size, I'd punch the shit out of you." Huggins, standing, said, "If I were half your size, I'd have punched you first. And I'll tell you something else, mister. Before you ever get back in this uniform, you're going to apologize for what you said, and apologize plenty. Now go on. Get out of here." Ruth turned and went on to the field and slammed his way from the clubhouse. He checked out of the team hotel, canceled the railroad tickets back to New York, and he spent the night at his favorite St. Louis bordello, an elaborate place complete with restaurant that catered to big spenders like Ruth. And instead of going back to New York, he goes right back to the same brothel that got him suspended in the first place to drown his sorrows and relieve some of his stress. He later makes a full apology to Miller Huggins and does so in front of the Yankees team and promises to never misbehave again. They allow him back into uniform, but he does pay that $5,000 fine, which in today's dollars equates to close to $100,000. So we're not talking chump change here. It's all the corroboration I need. I think that's enough for Ben Bradley to say that is a print. Without further ado, we're going to go over to where the bordello was. 4021 Forest Park Avenue. Right across from IKEA. Now this neighborhood is changing quickly. It's part of the Cortex district. And very little of the neighborhood remains from when Babe Ruth would have been cavorting here. But as we walk across the street, I want to point out this brick building to the left here. That was the first auto plant of the Ford Motor Company in St. Louis. They made Model Ts in that building, Model A's and Model Ts. It was Ford's St. Louis auto manufacturing facility up until the 1940s. So that certainly would have been here when Babe Ruth was coming to this bordello. You can certainly imagine him leaving the bordello early in the morning, looking across the street and seeing the auto plant. Now this white building here, we'll be back here for this white building. Not going to say what it was just yet, because I'm still doing my research on it, but we will be back here for that. And we're going to have to come back soon because the white building looks like it's about to get torn down. Now I know it sucks when after all this buildup you get someplace and find out that what you were going to see has been demolished. Nevertheless, that's the price we pay when you are a history detective. Sometimes the bodies are not there, but you can still prosecute without a body. And this is it. This is where May Trainer's brothel was. This is where Babe Ruth liked to come play. This is it. Today it is a parking lot for the Salvation Army thrift store. Pretty cool. I finally found it. So, next time you come to the St. Louis IKEA, come upstairs to the cafeteria, get yourself a piece of pie, and sit in the window seat and look out over the landscape and know that is where Babe Ruth played in St. Louis when he wasn't playing in St. Louis. Thank you for joining me on Highway Farty. In the next episode, I hope you will meet me in St. Louis. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.